Hello and welcome to the spring all-member meeting of the Cape Ann Climate Coalition, which we call the CACC. I'm Candace Wheeler, and the co-moderator is Valerie Nelson. We're both members of the CACC Organizing Committee. The CACC is a group of citizens from the 4 Cape Ann communities who are dedicated to working to respond to climate change, both mitigation and resilience. We are devoting this session to hearing from 3 climate action leaders from like-minded municipalities about how to mobilize communities to create a pathway to net zero, a net zero carbon footprint. I want to thank our 3 inspiring panelists for joining us tonight. They are Carol Harris, who is on the Truro Climate Action Committee and the Outer Cape Climate and Energy Committee, Patricia Gozemba, who is the co-chair of SAFE, the Salem Alliance for the Environment, and Christine Downing, who is an activist for the Rockport Net Zero campaign. What is the context for all of our local efforts to reach net zero? The Mass Legislature has passed legislation known as the Next Generation Roadmap to Net Zero, which requires the state to meet targets for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. By 2030, the state intends to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% and to reach net zero by 2050. To achieve these targets, every community in the state will need to make and implement plans to reach net zero by 2050 or sooner. And given the increasingly dire predictions of climate change, the emphasis must be on sooner. To reach net zero, a community must replace as much as possible of the fossil fuel energy used in providing electricity, heating and cooling of buildings, commercial and industrial processes, and transportation by substituting renewable energy sources and by reducing energy consumption via improving energy efficiency of buildings, transportation, and processes. And a community must also offset any remaining greenhouse gas emissions with carbon sequestration and or the purchase of carbon offsets. In other words, the carbon that we put into the atmosphere must be balanced by the carbon that we take out of the atmosphere by natural or man-made processes. The less carbon we emit, the less we will have to sequester. This webinar provides some examples of how to begin this process. The webinar will be recorded so that it can be shared with those unable to attend tonight. Because of time constraints, we will mute the audience members' microphones during the webinar, and we ask that you type your questions into the chat. Valerie will pose 3 questions, the 3 questions in our flyer one by one, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to respond to each question. Then we will take questions that have been submitted to the chat to the extent that time allows. We are aiming for a total of about an hour and a quarter for the program and questions. And if you might like to join the new CACC Net Zero Working Group, please stay on after the webinar and to meet with us or contact info@capeannclimatecoalition.org. And now Valerie Nelson will provide a little background on our 3 questions and then ask the first question of all the panelists. Welcome to all. Unmute.
Okay, good, that appeared.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Candace. I'd like to provide just a bit more context for this workshop tonight on behalf of the Cape Ann Climate Coalition. Last fall, we conducted a survey of members and learned of the wide-ranging values and interests of all of us. There were a number of priorities that emerged, and members also indicated which possible projects they might be willing to work on. A recommendation for residents to work more with local government was one clear message, for example. We also learned from exploring what volunteers and climate activist groups have been doing in other Massachusetts towns, and in particular that there doesn't seem to be a cookie cutter formula for local work. There are so many net zero projects that a coalition can take on, as Candace said, ranging from climate emergency declarations to communities, solar and wind, to electrification for heating, cooling, cars, boats, vehicles, charging stations, efficiency, and then also reforestation and soil regeneration through better agricultural methods, adoption of building codes, wetlands and marsh protection, subsidies and financing programs. You get the image that it's a very long action agenda. And I think we came to realize that towns are approaching it differently. And that's what we'd like to hear about. How did you capture such a successful formula in your own right? The energy of yourself and other people in your community to prioritize the things that you did. So we have 3 questions in that regard. How did you get into climate activism and motivate others? What have been your areas of focus, and how have you been working with your municipality? So we'll go through those one by one and have the opportunity, as Candace said, for questions from all of you at the end. So let's start. Carol from Truro, our first question is, can you please talk to us about how you personally got into spending time on climate in your community? And how do you think about your ability to mobilize others in your community to contribute to the net zero cause? What's your story? How'd you get here? Let us know something about yourself and how you conceive of what you're doing in Truro.
All right, thank you, Valerie. So in terms of how did I get into climate action, I grew up in a rural area and spent most of my time outdoors. That's my happy place. And I think that's probably true of most of us. And to jump forward ahead, I moved to Cape Cod full-time about 10 years ago. And you can really see if you're anywhere near the ocean on the East Coast, you can really see the impact of climate change. I think it's unavoidable. It's not even at this point year to year, it's month to month. We had a house go into the ocean almost go into the ocean in January. It's now on its 3rd move. So that's the visual reminder that we all have. So it's being able to see things like that that really motivated me to start to get involved. I think the thing that got me is, this is really happening. This is happening right down the street from me. I mean, my elevation is good for, maybe 100 years, but we may be an island at some point. I think that's a possibility. But that's how I got intrigued and interested and really felt the immediacy of it, living close to the ocean. So just to clarify, I'm part of a town committee. Most towns have climate action and/or energy committee. In my town, in Truro on the Cape, in the Outer Cape, a group of activists in town got together and petitioned the town to create a climate action committee. And the town voted and passed that. So we have local climate action networks, but we also have a municipal climate action committee. And so that's how I got my way in. I joined the committee when it was first formed about almost 3 years ago. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I volunteered to be the chair of the committee. So there you are. And to take that a little bit further, almost a year ago, we formed a coalition of town committees from Provincetown to Orleans. That's the whole Outer Cape or the upper arm. And we meet once a month to just share ideas, talk about what we're working on, and ask for help. Like, I'm struggling with, how do we handle this? What did you guys do? So that's been pretty amazing. It's nice to do the sharing. So that's sort of my background, in a quick snapshot. How have we been mobilizing others? Because we're a town committee, people have to volunteer. We can ask folks to volunteer, though, and they have to be vetted by our select board. So you go before the board and they ask you a few simple questions. But to encourage people to join, we've tried a lot of different things. We've put up posters in town, so we've actually kind of advertised to join the group. We've put, again, I'm calling it an advertisement, but request to people to join the group in our community newsletters. There's a couple of different organizations in town, so we've been able to tap into those, including through the school system, because there's a lot of communication back and forth between schools and parents. So that's a great way to kind of get that audience or get their attention. And we've had we do a lot of outreach. That's one of our biggest goals, is to kind of inform and educate people about the impact of climate change and what they can literally do. So we've gone into town events. We have a farmers market. Most towns do that now, I think. So we had a table in there every week. We'd sit there and just kind of chat with people, provide them some basic information about climate change and how they can address it, and just try to engage people to get them to start thinking about it, which I'm sure it's hard for all of us because everybody in the summer is in vacation mind. But it was very interesting, and we did actually get some folks we've been working with off and on since then. We've gone to the Council on Aging and the local library, and we plan on going to other events as well. But I think if you think about it as an advertising campaign, where you're recruiting just like you're trying to hire, and I don't mean to make it sound corporate, but steal those frameworks. They're a really great way. They've already been proven to work. And then the obvious thing is word of mouth. If you have friends, neighbors, and they'll still like you, even though you're asking them to join up. Even if they don't join, it's a way to get them, interested or intrigued, or get their minds going that, wow, this is really happening. And people are really working on it. So I think communication in any way, shape, or form, if you have social network platforms, use those. Word of mouth is great, and that's kind of been working for us. We just got 2 new people because we've been out asking people in public settings to join up. So that I don't know if that's enough for you, deep enough, but that's kind of the background of how we got started here.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. So next we have Pat Gozemba from Salem up on the North Shore. Pat, what's your life story and how you got to this cause?
Okay, thanks a lot. I feel reassured. SAFE does many of the same, uses many of the same recruiting strategies that Carol articulated, but let me go into a slightly different story perspective, focusing on my guiding philosophy and what pushes me to do this. So a guiding urge for me since I was a kid has been to insist on fairness and justice. I learned early on that there is power in numbers, working with others to assure justice. Let me mention a few movements for justice that I've been a part of: civil rights, women's rights, the anti-Vietnam War movement, pro-choice, salary equity, LGBT rights, marriage equality, the anti-nuclear movement. Yes, I was a part of the Clamshell Alliance to stop the Seabrook nukes, and I was arrested there. Climate justice, environmental justice. Let me leave the litany at that. Organizing and acting for justice is my lifeblood. In all of these movements, I've learned, and am still learning, organizing skills and strategies. I always felt that the most important lesson that I could teach my college students was how to participate in democracy, how to understand the power structure, and how to bring about change. I would routinely assign my students the task of going to a demonstration on any topic that they liked, such as pro-choice or pro-life, and having a friend of them take a picture of them at the rally. Then I would require them to write a letter to the editor and an opinion piece about the topic that they had chosen. I wanted them to learn participation with others and strategies for persuading others to agree with them. I was always teaching about power structures. Power over us manifested in corporate greed, prejudice, denial of rights, in short, classism, racism, sexism. The power within ourselves that builds when we become confident with knowledge and commitment, and the joys of sharing power with other like-minded folks. I came to the climate movement for a second time, 25 years after Seabrook, in 2000, at a meeting about the coal-fired power plant in Salem. And that meeting was sponsored by Clean Water Action and HealthLink. What I learned at that meeting truly enraged me, and I spoke up. And I want to do an irony alert. And here I was arrested in 1975 at the Seabrook nuclear power plant, but naive in 2000 about the climate and health effects of the coal plant in my neighborhood. In 2001, I retired from Salem State and saw to the publication of a book I was working on, Pockets of Hope: How Students and Teachers Change the World. I then committed to being a retired teacher who would work on climate issues. So 1 week after 9/11, in our living room, my wife, Karen Kahn, and I were among the 5 founding members of Salem Alliance for the Environment. We committed to energy justice, but neither Karen or I are single justice activists, and we began working on a second book, Courting Equality, on the Massachusetts marriage equality struggle. Justice has always been at the heart of our activity, and that's the motivational part, the more philosophical part of this. So thank you for listening to that.
Thank you, Pat. Justice runs through the whole thing. That's a great story. Yeah. And how different from Carol's too, that you got to this. So the last panelist is our very own Rockport, Christine Downing. Christine, can you talk to us about how you arrived at activism and climate and how you're bringing your community of Rockport together around the cause? Unmute, can you unmute?
Mine's a little different, at least how I went at this. It's perhaps more personal. It's I've been involved in a lot of action through my life also. So that includes, and against the Vietnam War, et cetera. But more recently, when I moved to Boston, I lived in Charlestown about 30 years, and so there's some examples there that focused me on the environment more. A lot of the houses in Charlestown are brick or stone, and they turn into pizza ovens in the summertime. So it happened that I had, there was this wonderful 3-story old apple tree next to my house, belonged to a neighbor. And it was wonderful. It was full of life and leaves, and and then they took it down. And my house heated up, and the air was not, I couldn't breathe as well. It was very clear that contributed oxygen to my spot where I was living. So that's one. And also another piece of it was that who knows why, but what's called Boston ivy, which is actually Virginia creeper, grew all over the bricks in my house. And I had it repointed, and of course then took off all of the Boston ivy, and learned very quickly in the following season that the Virginia creeper had reduced the temperature inside my house in the hot months of the summer by about 15 degrees. It was amazing. So that's one, just slowly shifting my attention. I lived across the street from a really bleak inner city school. It was completely paved, all asphalt, and kids were bussed in. So there are a couple issues there that made something really clear. One of my neighbors was an engineer, and he got the idea of, we could actually have a tree-lined street here. So he knew how to get the hose bibs in, and he worked with 3 city departments, which is a miracle, to do it. Took about 2 years. We were persistent. And once the hose bibs were in, then the city arborist was the next stage, and he could arrange for the places where trees would go, tree pits, have the asphalt broken up, taken away, and good dirt put in there, and then had 9 trees. So supplied them all. And also then we had talked with the teachers, and they chose the trees. They were very interested in having different kinds of trees so they could show these kids what they, talk about them. And then the arborist gave a lecture to the kids on how you plant trees and what these trees are and what they do for you. And then the kids, he brought shovels for all of them. So 45 kids in the morning and 45 kids in the afternoon planted those trees. They dug the holes out and then they planted those trees. And then, so it's the next step is really watering them. And I spent the next 2 years watering those trees, carrying hoses across the street. And so now that's a tree-lined street, and nobody thinks about how that got there, which is good, and also maybe not so good, but that's one of the things that it points up, is that it only takes 1 or 2 people to get something going. And that's happened over and over again in my life. I'm from California, and I lived for a time in the Upper Mojave Desert. And at this point, it's so I've seen it over many years, and it's not just dry. The desert's very beautiful, but it's not just dry, it's dying now. It's so dry that the vegetation, and I'm sure also animals, are not able to live there. I also lived in Northern California and saw pristine beaches affected by oil spills, and also all of the wildlife. Here I see the storms getting more extreme, more dangerous, and destructive. And oops, that's my 5 minutes are up, right? Okay, wait, I try. Just quickly, when Trump was elected, Cape Ann Local Action got started, and I went. I was so happy to be there. There were like 45 or 50 people who turned up, just saying, what can we do about this? So that was a motivator, and a lot of things came out of that. And also, I would think that CACC is also something that has emerged from a lot of people went to that. So let's see. There, just locally, quickly, I did say this is a little bit longer, but in Rockport, there are 3 things. I heard that people had aggregation contracts to figure out what is green, what's the solution. I get so much mail that says green energy or whatever, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I asked Tom Mikas, who's the chair of the Green Community Task Force here, can we get that here? And he said, we already have it, and it's been sitting on the town administrator's desk for months. It doesn't cost the town anything, and it's a financial benefit for the residents. So it's not a priority until it's a priority for the Board of Selectmen, it's not going to happen. It's not the only green project that is sitting there neglected. So that's one. The next one was that the school superintendent was offered a fleet of electric school buses, and at par. So the grant money would have reduced the cost of those buses to what it would cost to get a fleet of diesel buses. And he declined. And I thought, no individual should be able to do that, and we should not be making decisions like that now. We should have wised up years ago. And the third one was that the DPW, the Department of Public Works, when I first got here in 2016, had asked for about $4.5 million for a new barn. And so we voted that, and then that sat and got redesigned, and then they asked for another 7.5 million, I think, approximately. And because prices have gone up or whatever, and we voted that through, and then they just asked for another 5 million. And I inquired about whether this building was green or not, and in fact it wasn't. I went, and so I thought, well, that's the place to start. And so I went to the DPW building committee meeting. In their public comments, I asked, since you're going to redesign this building anyway, and you're going to downsize it, could you possibly make it green, or have you planned to make it green? And the answer was from the builder, not going there. So it was not something that should be said to a constituent.
So
Anyway.
Christine, can we, maybe some of the content of what you worked on is in the next question, but I really appreciate all 3 of your answers. I'm hearing how much one event, one local, whether it's coal-fired plant or the ocean encroaching on the shoreline, or some tree coming down, that the very personal is can what you bring you all to working on this cause. And also the power of relationships, which are very personal relationships, reaching out to your neighbors and friends in the community. And that's so it is a very place-oriented personal exercise, it's sounding to me like. So thank you for all of that. Candace, did you want to lead off with the second question?
Sure, I would be very happy to. So the next question that we are interested in is, what have been the areas of focus for each of you as you've gotten some traction locally and you are choosing what issues to move forward on? What seems to have caught the public interest and gotten people willing to come out to meetings, willing to volunteer, and so on? And it may be a little different in every community. Christine gave us a flavor of some of the things that got her going. But we're interested in the areas of focus that have worked on a community scale. So maybe if we could start with Carol Harris. What are the issues that your two groups have focused on?
Yeah, you know, it's a hard funnel to get that done because there's 8 million things to be done. But I think that's a key point, is to try to bite off what you can, you know, work on and not be overwhelmed by the 8,000 things you could be doing. But for us, because we're a town committee, we were charged with doing a greenhouse gas inventory for our town. So that was quite an exercise to go through to try to estimate, you know, how you know, what quantity of greenhouse gases we were generating. And the goal of that was to help us set our focus. So just for a little background, Truro is a tiny town. We don't have any industry. You know, it's largely tourism. We have a tiny harbor, but it's not a true working harbor. We don't really have a lot of commercial buildings, and we don't really have public transportation. So most of our greenhouse gases are generated by cars. You know, buses do go through here, but we don't control them. And by buildings. So that kind of determined our focus, is like, here are the areas that we can have an effect on greenhouse gas emissions. And the effect is either reduce, you know, the production of greenhouse gas emissions, and alongside of that, improve your buildings and transportation to reduce the amount that you know that you're using. So it's sort of conserve and improve, if you will. And the places where you can do that are really just residential, commercial, municipal buildings, and then again, you know, cars and that sort of transportation. So those were our focus areas, and they still are. But when we dug down a bit, we actually did some surveys, interactive sessions with folks in town, and we had small group meetings, and we asked them what they were interested in. It was an open discussion as well as a brief survey. And what we found out via the survey is people want to do the right thing. They want to make the right changes in their homes and consider, you know, alternate modes of transportation, but they don't know how. So we took on education and providing information as a focus to start with. We felt that if we didn't lay that base layer down of understanding about what, there's a lot of confusing terms out there that get used interchangeably, like greenhouse gases, global warming, carbon emissions, what is net zero carbon. So we're trying to lay the groundwork for people to understand what the terminology means and what it means in our town. And then the next step is, and what can you personally do about it? So that's kind of our focus going forward, is to try to, you know, educate and inform, and then we can start moving towards asking people, please make these changes. The other thing I want to point out in line with that is that we believe that when you're at the community level of houses and cars and small commercial buildings, you know, restaurants and inns like we have, it's really about change management and how do you make change. And the example I'd like to give you is How do we all end up wearing masks? Yeah, they were mandated, but people made choices. So our goal was to, it's a social, sort of a social campaign to get people to make those changes in their day-to-day lives. Sadly, I think most of us are old enough to remember how we quit smoking. There was a massive campaign done, not by the government because they couldn't do it, because they were hamstrung by the tobacco companies, but by organizations like the National Cancer Society. So that's how social change happened. And you can probably think of other ones that you remember growing up, is that you heard it over and over and you were taught why this is important, why you needed to make this change. So we believe that's our base goal, is to try to get to the individuals in town who own homes, own businesses. What does this all mean? Sort it out for them, and then tell them what steps they can make. So that's, when you talk about areas of focus, that's where we are now. We expect to build on this and get into more specific things, but for right now, that's what we're focusing on. I also, and I might be close out of town, so forgive me, but the other thing that we're trying to do is take a whole government approach, is what we're calling it. And what that means is trying to embed climate thinking in the decision-making that the town makes. So if we're spending money on police vehicles, we've asked them to please get electric vehicles, or hybrid, I think is what we've landed with. If you're going to build affordable housing, what are you doing to make that truly affordable? Don't leave these people out of moving into a green environment. Even if it's just energy, electricity ready, at least we're setting, as we're building this stuff, setting them up halfway. So we're trying to embed that thinking into all of our municipal decision making, whether it's financial or building or other stuff. We're also trying to work with other committees in town, like our health, Board of Health, our Conservation Commission, our DPW. All towns have these committees, or very similar ones, that are regulatory. We're trying to work with like the planning board and the zoning boards to get them into climate thinking. So this is also an area of focus and an audience that we're going after. So that's kind of, I'll stop there, but that's how we're focusing, is looking at who our audience is, what do they know, what do they need to know, and how do we get them that information. And that's not to say we're not working on regulatory things as well, but in order to get the local support for regulatory changes, we need to educate them about what the impact is going to be and what it means to them.
Yep, that makes
Thank
a
you.
lot of sense. Thank you very much, Carol. And now, Pat, how about with the city of Salem and Salem Safe? What have been the areas of focus? One of them pops out to me, which is your wonderful work on offshore wind. But there are many things that you have worked on.
Thanks, Candace. I want to say that institution building is important to me, and founding SAFE gave folks in Salem a local organizational structure to work against the power plant, the coal plant. It was important for us as Salemites to speak up. We didn't like having our health damaged and the planet we love destroyed by fossil fuel pollution, but we often felt defensive, portrayed as working class, undereducated lovers of fossil fuels. It didn't help then that our mayor, state representative, and state senator were all supporters of the coal plant. As an environmental justice city and a gateway city, we often felt the sting of criticism of more affluent folks in Marblehead or Manchester by the Sea complaining about the coal plant. Classism played a big role in splitting loyalties among North Shore residents regarding the power plant. In Salem, where almost 50% of our residents rent their homes, we knew and accepted the reality that our city needed the tax revenue from the power plant to support our schools and public services. Taxes to make up for the closure of the power plant was an economic threat to people. We looked with envy at public school systems servicing Marblehead and Manchester by the Sea. Our growing Latino community brought wonderful excitement to the city and cultural diversity, but it also brought huge demands on services that none of us wanted diminished, while we wanted to assure that the Latino community was serviced and welcomed. So let me go back to the founding of SAFE. In 2004, SAFE's first large public forum was on environmental justice. And we assured that our Latino community was part of the planning and had a speaking role. Importantly, we assured language justice with simultaneous translation. We will always be working on environmental justice and language justice now more than ever with the current rise of racism and classism in this country. Today, as Candace mentioned, we are working on offshore wind. The other issue that we're working on is the elimination of the use of fossil gas for energy, heating, and cooking. We remain mindful of the reality that our overarching issue is always justice as we work on these issues. So building coalitions is really important to SAFE. We're working on offshore wind in coalition with the Massachusetts for Offshore Wind Group and New England for Offshore Wind in bringing to our port a clean, renewable energy enterprise that offers economic opportunity to all on the North Shore and beyond. Cindy Keegan, the co-chair of SAFE, was happy to participate in the Cape Ann Climate Coalition presentation on May 3rd, exploring offshore wind opportunities for Cape Ann. And I want to assure you that SAFE stands in solidarity with Gloucester and all our neighbors. And on issue number 2, we are working again to eliminate the use of fossil gas for power, heating, and cooking, and assuring that the gas-fired power plant in Salem is decommissioned by 2050 at the latest, and hopefully before that date. So gas and offshore wind, those are our big focuses right now. And we are mindful all the time that justice is a big part of what has to govern all our activity. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Pat. Those are powerful issues, and I can see that they mobilize your community. And then finally, Christine Downing, what has caught the imagination of Rockport citizens as you've worked with the community? How have you drawn their support and focused on particular issues?
Let's see, I think one of the, we figured it out as we went along. Now we have a group now that is about 20 people, a core group, and a much larger group of people who support us by signing an online petition. That's about 265 people at this point. But what triggered it? We got started on net zero, doing a resolution, a proposed resolution to try and get support from the town government boards, commissions, and committees, and started presenting those. I started presenting those in January. And then the Green Community Task Force, which is a key organization, it's the key committee in our town, came, the chairman of our Board of Selectmen is a climate denier, or was, he's just gone off. But he intended to stop the Green Community Task Force from being able to work at all. So that really, that drove it. And we all of a sudden had 15 people turn up who were there to witness this attempt, and probably helped to reduce the effect of it. But that became our core group, and our net zero action merged with that, and that became the first project for what is now Rockport Climate Action. So now we have a really energized group of people, a core group that's beginning to work on projects and spreading out. When I started this, there were 3 of us, Tom Meekus and Steve Wood, and I worked up this proposed resolution for net zero. And we wanted it by 2040, but it actually needs to be earlier. We all know that. The two directions we took it were through presenting to individual boards, commissions, and committees and asking for letters of support. Well, we got turned down by a number, but we sure got a lot of them who supported it. And that wasn't the easiest thing for them to do. I don't know how often this has happened to them, but we were able to go to, well, the second part was we filed and were an article on the warrant for the town at the annual meeting in April 2nd, and took it in front of the entire town, seeking their support of this and presenting it then in front of the Board of Selectmen. We're able to show a list of the numerous boards, committees, and commissions that supported us, in addition to members of the faith community, and all of the kids in all 3 schools of the Rockport Public Schools voted in support of this. So that's a big one too. I'll tell you, when kids show up, yeah, exactly, it really pays. So we now have an alliance with the green team in the high school. So anyway, we did that, and then we're also have met with selectman who's interested in creating a climate resiliency committee. And we've have worked to clearly need to continue doing this, to elect green candidates and to work to get the town clerk in place, because our elections really make this happen. Without having policy in place and the right people who are elected officials, it really is, it's an obstacle. Let's see, a couple of things that we're doing, that probably covers what you want to know. We have a lot of projects coming, but there are a couple that are, the Green Community Task Force has a whole bunch of things that they're doing, and which I can't list, I'm sorry, but here are a couple of other things that we need, and I haven't found studies for these that summarize these already, but a question that keeps coming up is, what does it cost? It's too expensive, et cetera, but we don't actually have a survey of comparable towns and cities and for the economic impact of net zero and going green. So that means partly rethinking it, because usually when you say you have a new building, you're putting a new building up, and then you just look at the costs of that for that time when it's built, but you really need to look at the life of the building. So it really means like tweaking how you consider this data. We are also gathering carbon reduction plans to look for models. And with this, I would, if we're really lucky, we will find this already done. But if it hasn't been done, we'll have it and we'll share it. So that's another piece. Projects we have coming, I just wanted to mention this. This is one, we did this with Rockport Democrats some time ago. We were in a parade, we were a unit in a parade, and we joined up also with some other another climate group, but this actually came from right after Trump was elected, and I thought, oh God, we need a new ship of state. And then Ann Patrice Hickey said, no, we need a fleet. And so we came up with lifeboats. Can you see this? And we marched with a fleet of lifeboats. These are just made out of foam core. Nice. And the thanks. So we're and we use them for standouts and so forth, and also yard signs. So we're going to we're just starting to dream this up, because we can get to do things in groups again, and there probably will be a parade in Gloucester and a parade in Rockport on July 3rd and 4th. And we thought we want to link up with CACC and see if they want to do something, and also some other groups. And there's perhaps some politicians, and all on climate. And I think what we can do is probably make masks. We have a lot of artists among us, and to make masks out of paper, and like a jellyfish out of an umbrella, and costumes, etc. And the main point is being positive and making it fun and cheerful to engage in this. So
Christine, in talking to you earlier, you mentioned something that I found very interesting, which was that some of the visual images, such as the chart that showed net zero as a kind of a balancing on a scale, had been very powerful for
Yep.
you guys.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. At least I feel that one of the things we need to do more is use the techniques of advertisers and marketing, and it's basically visual and it's dense. So what you get in 30 seconds is really powerful, and it moves you.
Yeah.
So that
I'll learn from that.
definitely. Tom, can you pull up that image again of the balance scale? So this is one that I used in the annual meeting to explain what net zero was, because I really felt like most people really didn't know. They were in favor of it, but they didn't really know what it was. But that this is really a balance scale. And right now, as you see in the upper image, we're heavy on fossil side, and what we're trying to do is by 2040 or before, because we want to fast track this, is to have this in balance. We would love to see this happen by 2030. So carbon offsets are like trees, solar, wind power, trees sequester carbon in the soil, and they inhale carbon dioxide. So there are others, but does that address what you're?
Yes. And I think we can all learn from the power of those images and use them more. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it back to Valerie for question 3.
Thanks, Candace. And I'm learning so much about the power of the personal getting involved, and also that issues that really take on some power are locally based, whether it's the coal-fired plant or other things that relate strongly to where the community is dealing with things, or like you said, Carol, the nature of Truro as a smaller community with buildings and cars, so that the net zero agenda for any given community is going to rely on the particularities of the place and what catches people's really deep attachments. So the last question then was, and it came out of our survey, is a strong recommendation for having a solid relationship of residents and the local government. And some of you have touched on elements of that, but I wondered if it may be the same, which is it's very particular to your place and the culture of government there. Can you speak how you see that relationship of government and the people where you are, and also a little bit on how you see the role of regional collaboration across towns? The Cape Ann Climate Coalition has 4 municipalities. What kind of advice can you give us about regionalization? Carol.
So because we're a town committee, we might have a little bit more of an in with town government because they appointed us. We have a select board and they meet twice a month. And so we have a liaison from the select board who is assigned to our committee. So there's someone I can go to who sits on the select board, whose job it is to help me and help my group and pay attention to us. And so she's been wonderful and very supportive, but having that liaison is really helpful. The other thing we have is we have a town hall liaison. So that's a department head who again is assigned to support the Climate Action Committee. So that again is someone we can go to for help or support or getting into town hall. And if you can make that happen in whatever fashion, that's a lot of help. Because sometimes I don't know how to the right way to approach, let's say, the select board. And these are people who have plenty of experience. And so I can use them as a resource for what's the best way to get this point across, or who do I need to speak to, or who should I include? So that's one thing that I think is really helpful. And if you can somehow get on the good side or get involved with your select board, or if you have a town climate committee or a town energy committee or green committee or whatever name they've given, work with them to try to use them as a way to get into the municipality. So that's a benefit that we get from being a town committee. It comes with some restrictions, but that is a benefit. So what we're doing is, town meeting, especially regular select board meetings, especially in the time of COVID, are all televised. They are anyway, but now everybody's sitting at home on a laptop like this. And that became a great resource for us to engage with the town. So we periodically go to the select board and either give them an update on what we've been working on and what we've accomplished, or actually I'm going in 2 weeks to talk about, we've set some goals for the next fiscal year. What are those goals going to be? And, to try to have a back and forth with them. But we're also at the same time, we're providing that information to everyone in town who's watching the select board meeting. And citizens can do this. It doesn't have to be, a group directly connected to a town committee. I think you can do the same thing, request to get on a meeting agenda and say, here's the information we want to present, or here's what we're going to ask for, or here's our concern. And, there's a lot of ways, I'm learning this now, but there's a lot of ways to get into government, if you will. So we try to really build relationships there. We also periodically are presenting information to our select board. So right now we're working on a presentation for the select board. And then once we take it to them, we'll take it out to other groups or other boards and committees, and also to the citizens, of what does the new stretch code mean? Because this is coming up for Massachusetts. There are going to be 3 versions maybe of what you can implement. And we need to ask people to support it. And then at some point, because we're a green community, we're going to need to go to the town and say, pick one. And we obviously have our bias, pick the most advanced one. But in order to get them to participate, we need to educate them about what it means. And if you look at the state information from the Department of Energy Resources, that is the densest, most difficult document to get through. There's a ton of jargon. So we're trying to distill it down, like have consistent terminology, define some of the terms, and make it very straightforward, so that we can then, after we've educated them, go to them and all the people in the town to say, now we need you to vote on this. Now that you kind of have a basic understanding of what the benefits are. So we're teeing that up, but that's how we're working. One of the ways that we're working with government. We've also introduced policies. So we've gone, I think like most of you already have gone to town meetings and had like the climate emergency voted in and recognized as a thing. And we have, other steps that we're taking to enforce that, but we're really trying to build the groundswell underneath it. And I think, as I said earlier, we've gone to other boards and committees to talk to them about how they need to get into some climate thinking in their decision-making processes. So, for example, we sat down with our planning board and said, hey, you guys have you have to reinforce, you have to enforce, the laws and the bylaws of the town, but can you start thinking about things like, they got focused on trees and tree removal on, when you're building a lot or adding on. Can we start thinking about that? Can we start thinking about drainage? We're all sitting here on a big pile of sand and we're losing water, and how does runoff happen? And can we use permeable paved surface as opposed to impermeable surfaces? So it's just, we're not creating anything yet. We're trying to get them to start thinking in a climate focused way. So we're doing that with other boards and committees. And again, whether you're a town committee or a local action group, I think you can pretty much get on the agendas of those committees and ask for like half an hour or 15 minutes to present your case and have a conversation. We've actually developed almost a workshop format where we're trying to educate them about what climate means and all those words, and then what it means in our town and how do you practically think about it. So those are the big ways right now that we're trying to get involved with the municipality. And this goes back to our theme or our focus of getting a whole government approach. No one group can do it all. We have to get all different levels involved in all different ways. So this is the way we really want to get the municipality engaged and taking responsibility.
So what I'm hearing, once again, is relationships, education, relationships.
Yes.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So Pat, we look down at Salem as having some great leadership. Can you talk about your relationship with the City of Salem government?
Sure. I want to say at first that it's wonderful listening to Carol and Christine talk about the work that they're doing, because it reaffirms for me what we're doing in Salem is very similar. And I know I'm not talking as much about nuts and bolts as Carol and Christine did, but more philosophically about it. But we have been in the trenches, just like Carol and Christine, organizing our approaches to municipal government. But let me go back up for a second and just start higher level. Because SAFE realized how important it is to have a mayor, state rep, and state senator who have good environmental and justice commitments, SAFE members as individual citizens, not as an organization, work to help elect Mayor Kim Driscoll, Representative Paul Tucker, and Senator Joan Lovely. We recall only too well the sting of being in Gardner Auditorium at the State House prior to 2006 and having our then mayor testify in favor of keeping the coal-fired power plant operational. Our then state rep and senator agreed with him. We were angered by this, and we galvanized that anger by replacing them on Beacon Hill and by replacing the mayor, the leader of our city. Mayor Driscoll, since 2006, has been a force for promoting regional activity for positive climate outcomes. When Cape Ann's Town Green 2025 opted to work towards municipal power aggregation, Cindy Keegan and I went to Kim Driscoll and asked her to sign a request letter for funding from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to explore the possibility of creating on Cape Ann something akin to the Cape Light Compact for Cape Cod. While Salem already had green municipal aggregation, Cindy Keegan, Mayor Driscoll, and I realized that for it to really work, our regional neighbors needed to have more affordable and cleaner power. Another example, 2 years ago, when municipalities had an opportunity to file municipal vulnerability plans, Mayor Driscoll convinced Beverly Mayor Mike Cahill that Salem and Beverly should file a joint report. We did, and the result is terrific. And I hope you'll go and check out on the web that report. It's called resilient-together.org. It really shows what Salem and Beverly together are doing. So SAFE remains committed to this regional approach on climate issues, but we insist that justice be at the heart of all our work. We want to continue to work with Gloucester and all of Cape Ann. We cannot afford to be insular communities. Town lines, town boundaries are not meaningful to the climate. We all need to be in this together, making the best efforts that we possibly can. And we need to be always respectful about working towards goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's really important. So I'll leave my comments at that point, and maybe in the Q&A, I can add some more about the nuts and bolts of what goes on in Salem.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. So Christine, for Rockport, you've mentioned quite a few examples, even motivationally to get more involved, of things that people were relating to town government in Rockport and some things you have in mind. Is there anything more that you'd like to add about how you understand the relationship of the community to the town government? What you've been learning about that?
Let's see. Well, I think it's one of the excuse me, one of the things that we need is like with what Marcia Hart has been doing with CACC is she's our legislative tracker. She follows legislation really carefully and then reports back to CACC on issues, things that need attention, and flags, and things that need quick action and turnaround. So we get notices from her saying, "Can you write a letter? Can you make these calls?" So that's one of the things that downsizes effectively. We need the same thing here. We've had an incident just this week that has to do with the MBTA excavating along the railroad track right next to our water wells. And the practice is if you excavate, you take away the toxic soil and you replace it with clean soil, which we were able to stop it on one side, but not the other side of the tracks. They just did it there. There was a sheen, it went below the water table. There was an oil sheen on it. And despite the fact that the whole town, all of the proper town government, officials and boards were trying to stop this, and Bruce Tarr had been notified and been helpful. MBTA had been notified, nothing would stop them. So that really needs action, and it's a good example of, we had a really quick response within, I think in less than 12 hours, we turned up about another 15 people who showed up to witness this at about 7 in the morning. And that's one kind of example. I think that Marcia also knows the mechanisms, that when there is an issue and something is coming up in the legislature on Beacon Hill, we've talked about this and need to set it up, and we can build what used to be called a phone tree. You remember that a long time ago? But so it's a communication network so that Marcia can trigger something. We've learned that it takes, you can trigger action from a legislator with 60 to 80 handwritten letters. When there are people who can write letters, but they can't do anything, they can't commit other time, but they can commit to, like, say 4 to 6 letters a year. Then as long as we know that, we can put it, it's about building the structure for it. So that then Marcia knows when to trigger it, what the content is, and then we need to be able to supply the people who can do that and respond with I would say we need find about 100 people who can do it. That's an example of it. A couple of other things. We are intending to, let's see. One of the things we need is an index of green action groups, so we know who our allies are and what they do and where the crossovers are, what our shared interests are, and that's both here in Rockport and then across Cape Ann and perhaps other places, because we're learning a lot from Cape Cod people and Nantucket and other communities. Another thing that's on our radar is making the waste stream visible and how to reduce it, because our places where the waste goes are saying no. That's what's happening. There's an end to this, and so we really have to work on it. Does not have the visibility it needs, and so that's really important. And a lot of it can be recycled or composted. So that's probably enough. But that do it.
Yeah, so thank you. And actually, Carol,
I just want to add one thing to reinforce what Christine was saying, because it's something we've become very aware of, is when you talk about getting enough people to call, a senator or a rep. We found out, one of my guys is great about snooping around and asking people stuff, but we found out that we were working on the stretch codes, and they have comment periods, they revise the codes, they have open comment periods again, and then they close it down and they put the policy in place. And we found out directly from someone in the organization that they count the number of responses they get. And counting means a lot. And so it's not even like, do we get 20 people this and 500 people there, without really getting down into the weeds. So again, to Christine's point, the more people you can get to respond to things like policy input, the more they're going to pay attention. And things have not gotten done at the state level because not many people commented. So they said, okay, not a priority, and let's move on to something else. So I just want to make that little plug for something Christine said, that's a great action that you can take. And to her point, people may have time to send a letter. They may not have time right now to do more action, but that's a very important action. Thank you.
Yeah, Pat, do you have something you'd like to add?
I just wanted to reinforce what both Carol and Christine have said and say that I also think as environmental leaders, that it's really important for us to have personal relationships with our state legislature, with our senator, our rep, our mayors. In Salem, we have a city council. I left the city council out of my comments about municipal government, but I have to say that who you have on for us, who we have on the city council is of utmost importance. And until last November, we did not really have a progressive city council. We had a splits among the city council about on some environmental issues. And in last November 2021, we elected the most progressive city council in memory. It's just totally amazing. Out of 11 members, we have 10 who are solidly progressive, who are solidly committed to the environment. So you can also play off. As we played off before we had Kim Driscoll as mayor, we would play off the city council against the mayor. You know, the mayor would do nothing in as far as environmental issues were concerned, but the city council at that time was pretty good. So we put all of our focus on the city council. Once we got Kim Driscoll elected, we could split our focus with the mayor and the city council. Mm-hmm. And it's really important to have those right people in those positions. The SAFE board is very committed to working on electoral campaigns, not as an organization because we're a 501c3, but certainly as individuals, we are strongly committed. So when it comes time to do door knocking for a councilor or for a state rep or mayor or the state senator, I think it's important for us to go out and be the foot soldiers and do that knocking and get petitions signed for them, get their nomination papers signed. So just a big plug for how much of a difference it makes to have the right people. I saw a comment in the chat from Ellen. It makes a difference who's governing. It makes a difference when today I called my state rep's office and asked for a meeting. Tomorrow we'll be having a meeting with Senator Joan Lovely to push legislation that we really care about. So those contacts and those relationships that environmental leaders have with our elected leaders are totally important.
So over and over tonight, what I've been hearing is relationships, either getting the word out and getting to know people or actually engaging in electoral politics and engaging with people in your government that you hope will make some changes in that direction. That's such a powerful message. Candace, do we have any questions in the chat room?
We do. There are 4 questions here. We may not be able to get to all of them, but the first one is, yes, I am unmuted. The first question that I see is, what is the time commitment for members of your group? Each of you have described what sounds like a significant amount of work and time. And I think that sometimes in drawing new participants in, that's a factor. Do you have a sense of sort of what the range of time commitments are? Maybe Carol, you start.
Yeah, so we're a town committee. We have to meet once a month. It's usually most committees meet for an hour and a half. For us, we chose to meet twice a month for 2 hours. That's our choice as a committee that we made. We do homework outside of that, so that may take a couple of hours. But what we've done and what we're doing, and this just happened today, which is fabulous. We've told people if you can't make the full commitment to be a member of the committee, we will welcome volunteers to focus on what they feel comfortable with and what they have time for. So for example, today we had 2 people show up to our meeting that said, hey, we want to help, but we don't have the time to be a full-fledged member. So I just want to suggest that to people. The work can be all-consuming. You know, this is more than one full-time job. If I had a department of like 5 people for our little town, we could get it all done. So it's really about, you know, manage your time, don't get overwhelmed, and be clear about how much you can contribute. And I think it's also worthwhile to get clear on, what you can contribute. If you like writing, if you like social media, if you like data, if you like, not political, but community outreach, bring those skills in and say, hey, I only have so many hours or, a little bit of time a month. Here's what I can do. But I recommend that if you have limited time, protect yourself, because it's so easy to go, oh, we should do this and we should do this and we should do this. And then you're overwhelmed. But I think it can be arranged.
Well, I know some volunteers in our community are putting in something that's more than a 40-hour week on their volunteer work. And you can do that. But I think the important message you've raised is that there are ways to use some of the specialized skills like data, that take less time and are more finite, but are very valuable.
Yes.
Any other comments on the subject of time commitments? Christine, unmute.
Yep. Okay.
There we go.
It varies. And what I've been telling people is whatever you can do is fine. It's wonderful. We want your voice and also your ears in this, so don't feel guilty if you can't do something now. You might be able to do something in the future and you'll be informed. We meet, so far we've been meeting weekly for an hour, and we keep it to an hour. So, and with a couple of exceptions, next couple of weeks, there are 2 other important meetings. This is one, although we did also have one on Monday. But so we're working around that. And also it varies from, I think Tom probably works 80 hours a week. Maybe it's more than that. And
right now,
also he's working now, and he's a Zoom master for I don't know how many committees. And some people can do the work on something for a shorter period of time. I was flat out working all the time I had for about 4 months. And so, but that launched something, and now it's diversified. So now I don't have to do that, but sometimes it will take that. Now, one of the other things I would add to this is if we had an index of a skill of skills, that would help in being able to say, I need somebody who knows marketing. I need somebody who is a media artist and can do a short piece, as we had yesterday. People who are in the sciences, also the arts, but people who can do design, people who are willing to, it's fine with them if they do another website, build another website, etc. But that would save some time, and it would also help us be able to identify who's willing to do some things that we really need. So that's on my list too.
Thank you. And Pat, did you have anything to add, or did that
I
cover
just
the
wanted
waterfront?
to add that, volunteering, we work as volunteers, but we actually learned a strategy from Town Green 2025, I guess that's Cape Ann Climate Coalition, which is setting up working groups. And that's great if you got people who are really motivated. So for instance, another group that I work for, especially around that I work with, is the Gas Leaks Allies. And the Gas Leaks Allies has working groups that are like, they are amazing. I mean, the kind of work that a lot of these people put in is just totally overwhelming to me. Many of them are scientists. I mean, I was a women's studies and English professor at Salem State. I learned about climate issues by teaching the book about Jan Schlickman, Civil Action, and to my freshman honors seminar. And I read that book with my students, and I was like, oh my God, this is like incredible that this kind of thing can happen, and that people in the community of Woburn could be lied to for so long. And here were so many residents getting cancer from contaminated wells, and W.R. Grace was, denying that was anything like that. So I feel as if I have to do more work than many of the people, for instance, in Gas Leaks Allies, because many of them are trained scientists and they can read stuff and put it together much more quickly. But one of the things that I can do is listen to what they're saying and try to figure out, how would the average person, or how would my former students at Salem State hear this, and what would motivate them? So I'm always, I have to say, I constantly feel as if I'm the special ed student in science discussions. And my point of view is always, wait, okay, how can we explain this to ordinary people who aren't scientists? And I was impressed with the graphic that you folks put up. Yes. I mean, that's the kind of thing we've got to do, is find out ways of making people not feel stupid or ignorant, and not feel as if we're looking at them as, why aren't you doing something? Because we do understand people have to work. I mean, I look at some members of our community, and people are working 2 and 3 jobs to make household incomes of $60,000 or $75,000 for the household total income. So I think there's a lot to realize, and there's as Christina and Carol and Candace has said, it's looking at what people can do and making people feel good about what they can do. If it's just getting 10 people on your street to sign a petition, great. Do that. We'll be grateful for it.
Now, we're very close to the end of our time, in fact, a little past it, but I see that there's one very open-ended question about, the effectiveness of state representatives that I think we can't tackle tonight, but there's a more limited question, which is simply, in your work with political leaders, are emails as effective as handwritten letters? Or, what's the guideline? If you want to make a difference, should you be writing on stationery and ink, or is email actually paid attention to by the political people that you are in touch with?
My experience is absolutely.
Okay.
I'm guessing, Pat, I'm guessing you have way more experience in this, but when we've written, we tend to get a quick acknowledgement of, it's probably an auto response, and some explanation of a time frame. And then, it may take a week, it may take a month, but we eventually get a response back. I would suggest that with paper mail, okay, it's not green. Let's just go there. But there's no way to track, it's no easy way for them to get back to you.
Yep.
If they text, you can text.
Yes.
But I would say that's, and I just want to throw in, I know this is a little off topic and we don't have much time, but you can ask your reps to come talk to you. We had our rep from Cape Cod, Senator Sear, come down to a group meeting of 5 Outer Cape climate committees. He was there. He showed up within a week and said, I'll do it. So I think that's something you can talk about, is you can invite these people in. You're their constituents, it's their job. And it's an opportunity to even better than an email and a letter is, the face-to-face, Zoom meeting.
That's a very good point.
But I'm guessing, Pat, you have a lot more to say.
No, I don't. I totally agree with what you said, Carol.
Okay.
I know writing letters is nice. It's a nice formality. Sometimes I even write letters. I tended to write cards more myself, just to friends. But with dealing with political representatives, I've just used email. I just use email and phone calls to their office, because I think they count. Phone calls and with phone calls, they don't count so much what you had to say. It's just, are you for or against something? That's it, numbers. So those numbers do count, both in terms of emails and phone calls to the office. And I find that I have to convince people that they don't have to be the smartest person in the world on the issue to call up the office. Most offices most people working in our elected leaders' offices are smart enough to be welcoming to us when we call. I can remember in the bad old days being grilled by a rep about what my position was, for instance, on wanting to close the coal power plant. And, having some unpleasant exchanges like that. But I think those days are over. They know now that with all of the access to media that we have, that they can't disregard us.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd like to, I would like, is it possible to ask Marcia Hart to speak on this?
Um, I'd love to do that. Valerie, can we go on for another couple of minutes?
Marcia, can you do a couple minutes just to add your thoughts?
Unmute.
She can't.
Oh,
There you
Am
go.
I unmuted? Can
yes,
you hear
now
me?
you are. Yes.
I've been told that the amount of time that it takes you to communicate is measured as to the importance of how many other people may feel the way that you do. So the online petitions that everybody signs that are so convenient are seen as that, a real convenience where all you do is you push a button, click, you're done. If you have to articulate a phone call, and even if it's, just stating a position, I'm for or against, that takes more time. You have to know the telephone number. You have to be able to say something. You're making a personal communication. If you email, it's very similar. It takes time. You have to know the email address and state a position. So that's thought of as much more important than something that's very easy. And of course, as someone said, the face-to-face is the most valuable type of relationship.
Mhm.
And it was Anne Margaret who made the comment that she was really impressed by an arts group because they would have 60 people communicate. And that's a number that moves the legislators, and Christine had mentioned that. So when you get to a certain volume of communication on one topic, it also has a really powerful effect. But the more personal relationship that you can have, the better.
Mhm.
Thank you
Thanks.
for that, Marcia. So maybe we can wrap this up now. Thank you. Oh, I did want to mention that we got registrations from a number of different communities, Peabody and Belmont and Newburyport, and Barnstable, I think, was going to try to send someone. So I hope we've all collectively learned many inspiring stories here about how to channel our own energies and engage people with relationships and find the initiatives in our own hometowns that really grab our attention and motivate us to work and spin off of those local issues. So we'll take a little break here, but Tom Mickas has written something that for the Cape Ann group, if you're interested in working on a new net zero working group, can you please stay on, and we'll have a Cape Ann discussion on that. But again, thank you very, very much. The recording will be available. And Candace, any last words from you?
The only last word is if anybody is interested in the net zero work group and can't hang on for a few minutes right now, do feel free to use the email for the CACC. And maybe Val, do you have that email? It's, I think, Cape Ann Climate Coalition.org, right?
I'm not sure. Tom, is that right? Or there's
Tom has popped it into the chat.
The email is in the chat. It's one of the first.
info@capeianclimatecoalition.org, and that will get to folks.
So any people who'd like to dive into this exciting work that our three speakers have spoken about tonight, can just contact that email address or hang on and continue the conversation right now.
And hope to stay in touch with you, Carol and Pat and Christine.
Thank you
Yes,
so much.
you
Thanks
all
for
so
having
much.
us.
A leap to
This was a
Cape
terrific
Cod
evening
and
for us.
Salem, so thanks one and all.